My name is Cami Ross. I work in the Office of Education Abroad at Case Western Reserve University. I'm here to talk about learning across cultures, and let's start with what is culture. So before we even talk about culture, let's talk about what is reality. This little goldfish knows his bowl. He knows the glass of his bowl, the water of his bowl, the walls of his bowl, but he does not necessarily know the world around him. That's important to remember because your world is what influences your understanding. And that's completely understandable and okay. We can't expect this little goldfish to know about the whole world outside of his bowl. So let's talk about how that actually comes into play, especially with perception. So when you look at this photo, you might see an animal. Do you see a frog or do you see a horse? If you saw either, you're honestly correct. But can you see the other, even now that you've made your decision on the first animal? Sometimes it's hard to move on and see that other perspective. A lot of that has to do with how our brains process information. Brains are meant to quickly see something and make identification and move on. 95% of our thinking process is unconscious. And so it's okay if you saw the one animal and are still having trouble seeing the other. But something to really keep in mind is that if you saw this one animal and you created a belief structure or an understanding around it, and then you met up with someone who had a different perspective on this same photo, you might have some difficulties in your dialogues. If you had to come up with, what is the animal eating today? You might have very different answers, and they both would be correct because it's how you interpreted the photo and quickly moved on. So there's further research behind this. This is Arthur Yarbus's psychological research identifying eye movements and how we really look at our environments in different ways. So the first question while looking at the unexpected visitors painting is estimate the material circumstances of the family. So you can see people really were looking at the clothes, the chair, different aspects like that. The next prompt was give the ages. So people pretty much kept with faces, but kind of got an idea on how people were standing in the room. Remember the clothes worn by the people. Here, they're not looking at faces at all. It's only on clothes. And so I point that out because vision really is a dynamic construction of the brain. It's about how your brain is reaching out to the environment to get what it needs and move on. So let's define culture now. That's why you're here, right? So there are hundreds of definitions of culture out there. I'm using Gerrit Hofstede's definition. He is really a trailblazer in intercultural understanding. And he uses culture as the collective programming of the mind, which distinguishes the members of one group from another. This one I like, especially for Case Western students where we have so many engineers. But also because it's about the collective programming. You are programmed to understand your world around you in a certain way. And it's about groups also. Your perceptions might be different from someone else's perceptions. So culture really is a lot of different aspects. So first off, it's learned. Like I was just saying, you can learn culture from your family, from your friends, from media, from your nation's leaders. You can share that culture. If you have a specific belief set that doesn't mean it's a culture per se. It really has to be something that's shared with a group of people. Also, it's systemic. It's something that has a structural base to it. Symbolic in that there are many aspects of symbols that are really connected to culture. It might be language. It might be a flag. What does an American flag mean? Does it mean pride in our country? Does it mean patriotism? Different points of time. It also meant war. It also meant different aspects. And so that connects with dynamic. Culture is constantly moving. Clothing is very different from what it used to be. Same-sex marriage understanding is in many areas different than it used to be. What used to be one belief system can and will often change. So today, just to point out, I'm mostly talking about national culture, which is values, beliefs, education, but there are other areas of culture also. There's individual culture that has a lot to do with family dynamics, environmental culture that mostly has to do with environmental and economic factors, and organizational. Culture within an office setting or a corporate culture. How does social justice tie in, for example, or what's the organizational structure? So let's talk more about that national culture piece. When you think about an iceberg is something that you really only see about 10–15% of it above the water. We call that the big C culture, because really a lot of that iceberg is underneath the water. We have no idea what it looks like, what the shape of it is. But you know, when you look at history books, you think of the Titanic, you recognize maybe how important that lower aspect or little C culture can be. So what is a big C or a little C culture? Big C is probably what you think of when I say, what is culture? It's food, it's festivals, it's clothing, it's what your language is. If you go to the Asian markets or the Asian festival here in Cleveland, you're going to see all of this and kind of think, oh, culture. What I really want you to think is something deeper than that. These are the aspects of culture that have a lot more meaning, that might change, that might not change, but these are the ones that often bring upon cultural conflicts. Things like values, notions of self, concepts of fairness, importance of time. How are elderly treated in your society? Are they people that you would keep in your home for multi-generations? Or is it something where it's really expected for you as an individual to move out of the house and for everyone to separate, maybe even use old folks' homes in order to keep everyone separated through that? What about personal space? If you think about a lot of people from cities, they might be used to kind of being in your face a little bit. If you even go to rural grocery stores, you'll see people be much more spaced even in line at the checkout, because that's what they're used to. A lot of this has to do with collectivism, individualism, power distance, other aspects of cultural dimensions that we will talk about in the next video. So thank you.